Hey folks, welcome to this private Dark Horse Q&A marathon. Hopefully we are live. Tell us in the chat if you can see us. Yeah. We are working without Annette today. Annette is not here. Zach is also not here.
Zach went off with Annette again? Interesting.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Now I get it.
Yep.
That explains why they're both not here.
Yep.
All right. We will have to give him a hard time about that later.
No, I think she's cute.
Sure. She's theoretical. Why shouldn't she be cute?
Yeah. Hello and good morning. Can see you great.
All right.
Awesome.
Excellent. Wow.
Okay, so we are, we're doing this slightly differently.
Slightly differently, yes.
But let's see, we're just getting started. 11:06. We've got the coffee stealer.
The coffee stealer is on the table and in the house.
Yeah, and I have, unfortunately, my computer also just crashed, and I'm working from it from the laptop.
I have something to say. I realize that a lot of our content involves me putting a kind of a dark message into the world, and I just wanted to try something different and tell people who have tuned into this stream.
Wait, are you going to sing for us?
No. I mean, if it comes to it,
he sings really nicely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And you lie really compellingly.
No, you sing really nicely, and you happen to know the lyrics to everything.
I do. I'm good with lyrics. All right. So back to me setting a different tone, a more optimistic tone. I just want to say things are looking bleak, but we are going to get through this together. And by this, I mean the next couple hours. After that, I can't make any guarantees. But the next couple hours, I think we've got it nailed. Yep. And we'll be here with you, and we'll see it all the way to the end.
Excellent. Yeah. So Al Quinn has also heard that Annette is a pretty good catch, and I think that's right.
Sure. No, as I said, if she's going to be just a fantasy girlfriend for our kid, then she might as well be tops in every category.
See, this is what we can do when he's not here. He won't go back and listen.
No.
Right.
He won't know.
So he's leading the rocketry team at his school, and today is an all rocketry team meeting at his friend's house. And actually, one of the co-leaders is not named Annette, but could be. She is of the correct sex to be named Annette
for the moment.
Nope. Sorry. Apparently, amazingly, Zach reports that at last Sunday's meeting, which lasted 3 hours, and then almost everyone stuck around for a couple more hours to talk because no one has the opportunity to do that anymore. No one was woke. This is a bunch of 16, 17, 18-year-olds sitting around talking politics, talking the new diversity, equity, inclusion officer at their school, etc., and being, by Zach's estimation, really careful and skeptical. So, a small ray of hope there.
That's awesome. The Zoomers. Maybe the Zoomers can save us.
Yeah. All right. So we have many excellent questions here. We will not. I have chosen. Let's see 28 of them to try to get through in 2 hours. I doubt we will get through all of those, but we will give it our best. Mm-hmm. Okay, first question. So you've seen none of these.
Correct.
And I've just seen them enough to sort and kind of organize so that similar-ish questions are somewhat together. And I could ask next time if you would like your name shared. Everyone who's on this can see each other's names in the Patreon, but if you'd like me to read your name as I read the question, in the future, you can indicate so in your question. I did not ask, so I'm not going to here. I often find myself discussing evolution with my creationist friends. They seem to accept that genetic mutations take place, but are not convinced that speciation does. How do I explain or argue for evolution in these conversations? Do you have any didactic examples of speciation and examples of why and how it happens? Thank you. So this is, of course, a topic for whole books, whole careers, whole academic programs, but it is exactly typically the place where there is the disagreement, right?
Yes.
That almost everyone really at this point acknowledges that what's called microevolutionary change happens, but it is scaling it up in time and to some degree in space, I guess, in terms of the entire form of the organism, that creationists and the like tend not to agree with.
So what I would say is you want to get the person you're talking to recognize that what they are saying is self-inconsistent. That is to say, if you believe in microevolution, then you believe in macroevolution. that does not necessarily mean that you believe that all of the species we see are the product of that process, but it would be impossible for microevolution to exist and for it not to produce at least occasional speciation, right?
So let me just say, I invoked those prefixes first, or at least the first one, and they refer in this case micro and macroevolution to time, to the time scale. The reason that if microevolution exists, macroevolution must, is that it's the same processes. There is some theoretical disagreement about which things might work under and what timescales more effectively or less effectively, but it's the same processes just over a longer period of time. So if these things are understood to take place at short periods of time, and we know there's been a lot of time, what do we expect the cumulative effects of those small changes at short periods of time would have done?
So if we can just go back to the Darwinian basics. So Darwin saw a ton, much more than we would expect for somebody stuck at his moment in history. He did not see deeply into the speciation puzzle, but he saw one part of it very clearly. Or actually, maybe it's two parts. The first one was he saw selection in domestic creatures as a very powerful force that altered them. He was right about this, and nobody would deny it because everybody knew that farmers selected for particular traits of their animals and plants, and that it worked. Right? So domestication of creatures and the change over time was not controversial. What he added was that this could happen by a natural process, that nature does the selecting as if it were a farmer looking for particular traits. So that's natural selection as opposed to artificial selection. And he laid out one mechanism of speciation, which is allopatric, which means different places. And allopatric speciation happens when a species is separated into two populations that don't or can't interact. And over time, they end up diverging. Now, they could end up diverging quickly for reasons of selection. In other words, imagine that a critter disperses over some water barrier, over a small ocean or something, or onto an island, and the circumstances on the island are hospitable to the creature, but they're not the same as the mainland, right? So you might get rapid selection for alteration such that when the two populations came back into contact, they wouldn't recognize each other or couldn't mate because there had been so much pull in some direction for the population that budded off that they would be incompatible. But here's the thing that your friend needs to know, which is even if the two circumstances were the same, right? The island was just a little offshoot of the mainland, and it had very similar habitat. If you give drift enough time, you will get enough change accumulating that the two populations will not recognize each other. So
drift is the random element in evolution.
Right.
So you just happened to be standing at the wrong place when the piano fell out the window, as opposed to you were standing there because you were trying to receive it from your friend up there who was trying to move it.
Or because your significant other has placed the piano there.
I asked you not to tell this story.
All right. Okay. Fair enough. But let's just say that what your friend acknowledges in recognizing that microevolution exists is that in a circumstance where a population has been separated into two, given enough time, there will be sufficient change that the two will not be the same species when they come back together. They will be physically incompatible. Yep. And so what you want to say to your friend is, look, are you telling me that with all of the millions of species that exist, that there is not one single example on the earth where the mechanism by which they became two was that some population that existed got accidentally divided in two, and enough time passed that when they came back together, they didn't recognize each other for purposes of mating, right? If you're telling me that never happened, I'm telling you you're misunderstanding how many species there are and therefore how many events that could generate that story there were. Right? So in effect, if you will recognize that it has happened at least once, then macroevolution exists. Then the question is, well, where did all these species come from? Because that story doesn't make any sense at all in the Amazon, et cetera. And we can answer that question another time. So the basic argument here is get your friend to go the first step, which is some macroevolution will necessarily have happened if microevolution exists. Also, I would point them to high-quality, intelligent design stuff for a better level of argument. In other words,
where would they find that?
I would say Stephen Meyer would be the place to check out that argument. Mm-hmm. He's a very good biologist. He does have a belief about some creation force, but you'll find the analysis is high quality. And so, at least set the bar somewhere interesting.
Yeah. So let me just re-say some of what you said from, like you were coming at it from the speciation, the macroevolution level, and sort of adding in some of the mechanisms that we understand to be true at the microevolutionary level. Let me just spell out the sort of the standard issue story very quickly for what the mechanisms of microevolution are. So you mentioned two of them. You mentioned selection, which is what people tend to think of when they think of evolution, because that was Darwin's big discovery. And it was what really allowed the field of evolutionary biology to take off. But selection is of course not the only mechanism by which changes in populations happen. And you mentioned drift, sometimes called genetic drift, which is the random element in evolution, which is to say, there through no fault or inclination or decision or physiological trait that you have of your own, you ended up getting wiped out by the volcano, the tsunami, the piano, whatever it is. Those are two. There's gene flow, which, because you're explaining this from the perspective of allopatric speciation, you sort of already built it in. Gene flow just refers to migration, immigration into or emigration out of populations, such that it changes what those populations are made of and therefore the complement of genes in them. And then fourth, the fourth typical sort of traditional mechanism of microevolution, in addition to selection, drift, gene flow, is of course mutation. And unless your friend doesn't think that genes exist, which it sounds like he is unlikely to be in that position, then do mutations happen either because you got hit by a ray of sun at the wrong time, whatever it is, do mutations happen? That would be at the somatic level, or in the germline at the level of egg or sperm. Well, that of course is another way for populations to change. So in your allopatric example, some 5 individuals from some population fly onto an island, and then a couple of mutations happen. And even if nothing else is true, that island population is now different from the mainland population because those mutations are new on that island and they just never existed on the mainland.
Yeah, you don't even need the migration to,
Yeah.
The fact of mutations happening even in the population that was in its original form is sufficient.
Right. All right. Next question. In species that use ZW chromosomes instead of XY, do we see a reversal of sex differences associated with the presence or absence of a second X chromosome in humans? For example, do these species have greater female variability and longer male life expectancy? If so, why? P.S. Your discussion of snakes ought to have a trigger warning. It reminds me of Slytherin.
Yep. So let's just say some things reverse, most do not. So the things like...
Let's just ZW, birds are ZW, and a number of herps, a number of lizards and snakes are ZW.
And lepidopterans.
And lepidopterans, and that's some other group
butterflies
of butterflies and moths, and one other group of insects too, I think. There are a few. So this is just genetic sex determination, which not all organisms that are sexually reproducing have. But among those organisms that have genetic sex determination, most have a single pair of paired sex chromosomes, and either they are identical, homogametic, in the females, such as in mammals, XX, or they are heterogametic, such as XY in males, or, as is true in birds and lepidopterans and some of the squamates, lizards and snakes, it's opposite, and males are homogametic and females are heterogametic, which has some interesting downstream effects.
Yeah. So let's just talk a little bit about the reason that some things should be expected not to reverse and some things should be expected to reverse. So one thing that being homogametic does is it means that throughout your entire genome, you have 2 chances at a functional gene at each locus, which is to say, in the heterogametic sex, if your the chromosome that is shared with both sexes has a defective gene at one locus, it is unlikely that there is a corresponding effective gene on the other chromosome because that chromosome tends not to have much on it. So in humans, a male with a defective gene on the X chromosome for something does not have another gene that can transcribe twice as much product in order to compensate.
So sex-linked genetic diseases tend to be carried by females but revealed by males.
Right. Now,
in humans, whereas you would expect exactly the opposite in birds, butterflies, and lizards.
Interestingly, if you think about it, this suggests another problem, which is, don't females get a double dose of stuff? If the right number of genes, or the right number of functional alleles to have for something on the X chromosome is 2, then males would be shortchanged. And if the right number is 1, so that males are not shortchanged, then aren't females overdosed? And so
you have dosage compensation.
Right. So you have dosage compensation in which one of the chromosomes is shut down in females in order that males and females have the same amount of X force basically in each of the cells.
So
now, wait.
Do you have like male bird bar bodies? Like what goes on there? Actually, I don't know the answer to this.
It's a good question. I'm going to predict dosage compensation of some kind, so it doesn't have to use the same mechanism, but something should shut down one of the copies. Now, partially in a complex critter like us, you can deal with this at the level of the regulation of the genes themselves, right? In other words, each allele can produce half as much stuff. That's one way you could do it. But basically, one of the chromosomes is inactivated in female mammal cells, female eutherian mammal cells.
And a metatherian and marsupials, just not platypus and echidnas.
Monotremes.
Yeah.
So in any case, you shut down one of the chromosomes. Now, here's the really cool thing, is the shutting down of the chromosomes does not always shut down the same chromosome. And there are places where you can actually physically see this,
So
right?
hold on. It always shuts down in humans, for instance, at the 23rd, not locus, the 23rd chromosome. It's never like, it never shuts down like one of the chromosomes at 15 or something. It's always at the sex chromosome.
In a non-monotreme female mammal, one of the X chromosomes is inactivated. Basically, it's tightened up. All the information is there, but it's not in a form that the enzymes recognize it and transcribe stuff. Yeah. But it's not always the same one. Where can you see this? Well, you see it in cats, in which an animal has 2 distinct coat patterns. So
Calicos.
Calicos, and I believe we had a tabby that was striped in some places and white in others.
This guy, actually.
Not this guy.
Right. So
I know patches.
Okay. So I know you have to be talking about females here, but we do have, white and stripy here.
Yeah, but this is different. So if you're looking at a cat that has like a patch with a border around it of one coat type that then has another coat type on the other side, what's happened is you have that animal is female. She has inherited one coat color from her father and one coat color from her mother. And depending on which X chromosome has been inactivated, you get the expression of these 2 different coats in the same animal. So in that pattern, you can identify the sex of the creature just by looking at its coat.
Yeah, that all calicos are female.
Yes. Okay, so this dosage compensation issue suggests that the creature that will have the hazard of no second chance allele, in the case it has a broken allele, will change between sexes. In a ZW creature, it will be females that are endangered by this, right? So sex-linked traits will go the other way.
Yeah.
And that to the extent that sex-linked traits are defects, females will be exposed to them rather than males. And go ahead.
No, go on.
In terms of things like longevity, there is a very good reason to expect that it should stay with the creature that we call, the greater longevity will stay with the creature that we call female, and it has to do with the game theory surrounding mating in the 2 sexes.
So let me just say that one of the hypotheses for why life expectancy is longer in females than in males in humans does have to do with the double X, but there's no support for this, really. Like it's definitely on the list of possible hypotheses, but And when I saw this question, I did just quickly do a Web of Science search on life expectancy in birds between the sexes, and I find nothing in my quick search. I don't know if that means that I just didn't spend long enough, or no one has asked the question. I'm sure someone has asked the question, but it may be a little like natural history note somewhere.
Yeah, it's probably it's probably going to be Ricklefs and Finch, who did a lot of stuff on longevity because of their interest in these patterns. But so here's the thing: that birds, there's a confound. So I would predict that birds would have a much lower degree of difference between males and females with respect to longevity, not because of the dosage compensation issue, but because of the widespread existence of monogamy in birds. So something like 85% of bird species are monogamous.
Yes.
And monogamy, because it distributes mates more evenly, changes the degree, the extremity of the selection on males, right? In other words, the competition between males, which is what makes them fragile, right? It makes them strong, but it makes them fragile. That competition is much reduced in birds because of actually the following weird thing, which is bird eggs are fertilized right before they are laid, which means that males know.
Give away all of this is like the greatest hits here.
I hate it. I always feel like I'm going to tell.
It's the greatest hits, dude.
When I was teaching, I felt like I was going to tell students everything I knew in one afternoon, and then I'd be done.
No, but this I always did save for the end of a long lecture on sexual selection.
Yeah. All right. So suffice it to say, there's a feature of the reproduction, the physiological reproduction, that causes males in birds to be much more certain that offspring that they think are theirs really are theirs, which causes them to be much more likely to invest in those offspring. Monogamy pays when males are certain of who their offspring are, and so it's heavily favored in those cases, which is why 85% of bird species show at least some degree of monogamy. But that should reduce the difference between males and females in longevity within birds relative to mammals. So it's a confound that makes it hard to see what fraction owes to the dosage compensation.
Right.
You find it?
No. So you said Caleb and Finch. This is not Caleb and Finch. I mean, you said Ricklefs and Finch, right? This is
Finch.
Same Finch, exactly. And you just happen to have it right here. So this is Longevity, Senescence in the Genome, giant frickin' book that you got when you were writing that paper on evolution of senescence, when you were I don't know, that year and a half that you were really focused in this. And there is a lot of stuff on birds, and I haven't had a chance to look through all of it, but so far I see nothing. You know, this is of course not primarily about sex differences. It's primarily about senescence. Older females produce fewer and smaller eggs. Some senescent birds show swollen, apparently arthritic joints. A lot of stuff around senescence in birds looks a lot like it does in mammals. But beyond that, I don't see anything yet. And also, I mean, this is probably 98 or something. This is not totally up to date either.
It might be older than that.
90.
90, yeah. I was going to say that one looks like it went to Panama.
Oh, yeah, I think it did. That definitely has. I've still got a copy of the. God, I can't remember who wrote it. The book on sexual selection that has rat nibbles around the edges from my tent in Madagascar. Yeah.
All right.
Proudly. Anyway,
so,
but the other question here was. Have greater female. Well, I guess you went here. Have greater female variability. Do these species with a ZW in which females are heterogametic and males are homogametic have greater female variability? No, we don't expect so, because the fundamental difference of what makes them female versus what makes them male, which is gametes, is still true in that eggs are a bigger initial investment, which the standard line goes tends to. These people can take it.
Too much biology.
Tends to set in motion a greater investment that continues. Basically, you get positive feedback of once greater investment, forever greater investment.
Yes, although I wanted to get the key element here, which is that the higher variance thing has to do with the game of mating and what role you play in it. So in species that are sex role reversed, you would expect this pattern to reverse. Now,
yes, and they do, and there are some birds that are sex role reversed, and greater female variability isn't really true in monogamous species.
Right. Right. But there's a
And most
confound
birds
here.
are monogamous.
There's a confound, which is I don't think it's going to track with whether your species happens to be monogamous at the moment scientists decide to ask the question.
Yeah.
It's going to have to do with how long that pattern has existed in your clade. So, what do we do with hyenas that are sex role reversed, or jacanas or something like this, where you have basically what's likely to be a relatively recent transition in mating strategy that then will cause a reversal in this parameter, but there's not enough time for a huge amount of consequence to build up.
Yeah.
So anyway, I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what I would predict. But yeah, we don't want to spend too much time here. But the key thing is what makes males shorter lived is the intensity of selection for them to be awesome at a moment when finding a willing mate is likely. Right? So high selection to be an awesome young man causes you to be a fragile old man, right? Mm-hmm. That's the thing that's causing the fragility. And you expect that to travel with the behaviors associated with maleness rather than the genes associated with maleness. Where those two things depart, you expect this to track the behavior, not the genes.
Yeah. Well, and it's also true that there are very few genes associated with maleness. There's so little at the genetic level.
You're of course alluding to the fact that they are inherited in a sex indifferent way, but they're of course activated in a sex aware way.
Yep.
So anyway, this gets to be a complicated discussion. This is why we can't do it all in one afternoon. Whew.
Yeah, exactly. All right, question 3.
Yes, 3.
Yes. Why does nature love symmetry so much? Is it related to cell division?
Why does nature love symmetry? I mean, nature,
There's so many ways. As with most of these, there are many ways to answer the question.
Yep. So the Bob Trivers way of answering this question, Bob was our first great mentor. Mm-hmm. I don't want to say that. Dr. Clark might have been my first great mentor. But anyway, he was certainly our first famous mentor. In any case, Bob's point about symmetry would be that symmetry is an indication of things having been well organized in development. And so a creature that is looking for a mate, for example, might key on symmetry because to the extent symmetry is not present, it suggests something may have been off. Now that something that was off may not be heritable, in which case it may not matter. But if it is heritable, it might matter an awful lot. So
you have, for instance, single-celled organisms that are colonial, just not demonstrating symmetry. They grow to fill a space.
Yep.
And so imagine coral or slime molds. Coral isn't single-celled exactly, but it's colonial,
yeah.
Right? And then also think about plants, which have a number of important differences with animals, which sounds both obvious, but it also there's more there than you might think in terms of the differences. And they also, probably many people have seen these images looking up into the canopy of trees appearing to keep edges between each other. They actually grow out as far as they can until they almost touch, and then accounting for wind and such, they basically don't tend to interfere with one another. They're engaged in competition, but in general, they're not growing over one another. And there's not exactly symmetry in those, right? It's growing to fill a space. It's growing to fill, in that case, the space that has light in it. Whereas non-colonial, multicellular animals, and to some degree, some fungus anyway. Fungus is more likely to have radial symmetry, and many animals do as well. But the bilateral symmetry is more the case for multicellular animals.
Yes, and it's also limited.
All animals are multicellular, aren't they?
Yes. All metazoans. But anyway, the problem here is that there is a huge priority on symmetry, which is so regularly broken that it basically calls into question anything that says symmetry is the thing because symmetry obviously isn't the thing because our hearts are reliably on one side. There are very few truly ambidextrous people. In fact, I'm not sure they exist at all. Their ambidextrousness is more common in people who are left priority rather than right priority.
But I mean, that question only exists because we are bilaterally symmetrical in the first place.
Right.
So we have this primitively, apparently non-split brain, which of course forms as left and right, but doesn't appear to be left and right at the level of very, very early vertebrates or very early chordates, craniates, that then splits, becomes lateralized, and then becomes joined again through, in the case of mammals, the corpus callosum, in the case of birds, a similar thing with a different name and a different developmental origin. So, being able to connect the sides and effectively specialize and do division of labor within your own brain is a benefit of the bilateral symmetry. It's sort of taking advantage of the being able to package stuff in different places and hide things from yourself.
I think it's kind of it's an analogous situation of the tension between right and left that makes a system dynamic and functional.
Politically right and left.
Yeah. That basically the symmetry is a part of the magic, and the breaking of the symmetry is the rest of the magic. And so anyway, nature loves symmetry when it's properly broken. And this is something one registers just about everywhere.
Yeah. So-called...
He is in danger of ending the live stream. That would be bad.
I don't think it was editorial, though.
No.
He's just cleaning his foot. So-called biohacking enthusiasts seem to advocate different activities that are allegedly rooted in our evolutionary past and or based on scientific research. Some I do understand and practice myself, for instance, restricted eating, intermittent fasting, given also the autophagy studies, etc. However, I cannot seem to find a good justification for cryotherapy, i.e. ice-cold showers, cryo chamber, or, dear Lord, plunging into a cold lake in October. I do generally prefer colder and milder temperatures myself, but 5 minutes cold shock to the system is something I cannot get my head around. Is there a good evolutionary reason to do so? Is this cold-warm stress somewhat similar to the stress related to fasting and feasting when it comes to food intake?
Yeah, I'm going to say strong guess in favor of the extreme cold, the value of extreme cold for brief periods of time, and probably the same can be said for the extreme hot, whether or not there is a behavior in the ancestral past that matches it. And
with regard to extreme hot, you're talking about sauna?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sauna or hot tub or whatever. I'm sure these things differ, but first of all, I would say there is a massive benefit, which I think correlates to one of the benefits of intermittent fasting as well, which is toughen your goddamn self up, right? You're going to face some bad stuff. And to the extent that we live these ridiculously easy lives, we all become wusses. And, at some point we're, crying to the great political gods to deliver us universal equality. And, it just leads to stupidity.
So it's a way of cleaning your physiological room.
It's a way of cleaning your physiological room, right? And, look, the fasting one is relatively simple.
Yeah, but he I think, says, I kind of get the fasting just as an example of, this one kind of makes sense, but you're going to make the claim that it's really actually a very similar explanation.
Yes, and that, in fact, to the extent that you will find traditions involving a regular fast of one kind or another, that basically... to the extent that you're going to have to run for your life from some enemy who spills over a border or whatever happens, right? You don't want to be detained by the fact that, it's lunchtime and you're hungry, right?
Yeah, if you get hangry after 3 hours without food, you're not exactly anti-fragile.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So toughening yourself up, I think.
And I could say this for sure, having traveled with such students in Ecuador and Panama and wondering what the hell kind of life they grew up with, that they seriously needed to eat every 2 or 3 hours. And these aren't people who had, insulin resistance or something.
Right.
They're just accustomed to snacking all the time.
Now, one thing I have noticed is that the degree to which you are toughened up by these things is only semi-durable.
Yeah.
Right? It is amazing how quickly, you can build up a tolerance to being hungry. If you're really good about the intermittent fasting, you eat once a day, you can build up a tolerance so you don't think about food during the day until you get to dinner time or whatever.
Yeah.
But then you break the thing for even a day or two, and it's like
Your body kicks right back in. It's like, okay, it's feast time. I mean,
Right.
I think this is sort of the feast fast dynamics. Like if you give your body an indication that we're now in a different mode, well, go find some of that food that's apparently so available. Go get it.
Right.
Go get it.
Exactly.
So, but with regard to cold, and you say as well hot, and I think this is right. One, it's it's going to toughen you up, like you say, clean your physiological body, but it also may deal with early low-level infections. Right, that it's we know this for sauna. There's actually some clinical data suggesting that I think specifically the far infrared sauna, but cultures with regular sauna use have been studied in I think the medical literature, and it shows a greater resistance to infection, like viruses and I think bacterial infections as well, though I'm not as sure about that. Although I do think there's also evidence for faster healing of surface, of like skin infections with regular sauna use. But I might expect the same thing to work for cold. Basically,
Yes.
if you're taking, if you've got a pretty narrow homeostatic set point as an endotherm, as we are and as we do have, then either going above or going below that for really almost anything beyond a couple of minutes, and you might well you might well deal effectively with infection.
Well,
One more thing. There's of course the medical treatment of induced cold coma, which my father experienced a year before he died, as a way to basically slow down all of the physiological parts of the body while other things may need to heal. So in my dad's case, he had his heart stopped for 20 minutes at least, and they said, "Wow, this is going to be a lot of damage potentially. We're going to put him in a cold-induced coma for 24 hours and then slowly pull him out." And we'd never heard of this at that point, but it turns out that it is increasingly this is one of the relatively few things that has come out of medicine that I know of recently that's neither surgical nor pharmaceutical, those being their blunt tools that they tend to apply to everything, the knife and the drugs, that really seemed to use an evolutionary framework, and seems apt. Slow everything down such that whatever damage might be happening happens at a slower rate. And once other systems can come back online, then healing can happen at a quicker rate.
So I would add two things.
Yeah.
One, it is interesting the degree to which sleep actually seems to be connected to healing. In other words, there's certain phenomena that seem to happen when you are dormant.
Yes.
Now, the cold coma is a different thing. The cold coma, though, actually suggests a reason that heat should be more effective at dealing with things like infection than extreme cold.
Yeah.
Which is that basically, let's imagine that you have a skin infection taking hold and you go into a sauna. Your skin infection is apparently adapted to human skin at human skin temperatures. You now expose it to some period of intense heat, right? And so you basically now killing it with extremes. If it's well adapted to normal skin temperatures, it is necessarily less well adapted to high skin temperatures. So by giving it that extreme, you are selecting against it, or you are selecting for something that is good at high temperatures, and then when you go back to your regular temperature, it's challenged.
Right.
Problem with doing this with cold is that cold basically shuts everything down. It turns it dormant.
Yeah.
And so just as we can...
It'll kill a few things, but they're not very robust in the first place.
Right. So, you can sanitize a surface with heat. If you try to sanitize it with cold, you basically just shut everything down, and then when you warm it back up, it comes right back, right? Same reason we preserve stuff in the lab in a refrigerator is basically you can slow down every chemical process, which means those chemical processes are all still viable when you warm them back up.
Yeah, although you can also preserve food by freezing it.
Right. But basically what you're doing is you are taking whatever bacteria is sitting on it and reducing its division rate to zero. So here's the thing, though. There is stuff that will work by a different mechanism from cold. When you get cold, your body does not need to, but in your ancestral circumstance would have needed to preserve energy because being cold wastes basically food that you found. It forces you to find more food to replace whatever heat you've lost. So we're very sensitive to cold, not because it's really bad for us, but because it's really expensive, and our ancestors cared a lot about things like that.
And there's a clock ticking, as you say, like it's using resources at a rate faster than what you would normally be using resources at, given a particular activity level.
Yes, you're burning food just to keep warm.
Right.
So what your body does in response is a lot of shutting down of the periphery. So it takes blood that would be radiating heat into the world, and it shunts it to the core, which actually puts your limbs in danger. You can get frostbite because your body is not perfusing your fingers with heat because it's trying to preserve calories. So what this means is if you dive into a cold, first of all, think about what happens when you dive into that cold water. Really sucks briefly, really bad. Right? Like
it kind of
intolerable.
Sucks for the duration.
No. You jump
I
in.
hate it.
Well, figure out whatever level is tolerable, but uncomfortable. Right? You dive into that tolerable but uncomfortable, and it's like hard to breathe for a little while, and it's like, oh my God, I got to get out. Actually, it's not so bad once you're in, right?
Yeah.
What that is your periphery shutting down. So suddenly you are not just hemorrhaging heat into the water. You're preserving heat. And then you'll notice if you get out and you jump back in, it's not so bad because you're already shut down. It's in fact hard to get the body to reperfuse the periphery when it's aware that intense cold is there.
Yeah.
So
I guess.
So anyway, what I'm arguing is that if you imagine that some fraction of your capillaries are like a big sponge, right? And that one of the things that might be useful to you is to squeeze out the sponge periodically and then reperfuse it, just like, some gross sponge on your drain board. It might be good to like squeeze whatever's in it out and refill it, a couple times just to make it a healthier sponge, right? Your periphery, you can do that. How do you do it? You jump into something really freaking cold, let your body squeeze out the lymph, and then reperfuse over time. Would that be good for you? My guess is it has some value.
I like that. So probably no one watching will have this as an option, although I see greetings from Finland. So probably some people live in some places where this is a different option. But I'm reminded, hearing you talking about treating your body like a sponge, of the Olympus Spa, the Korean women's spa, of which there are 2 locations in Washington State. And you can't go if you're a dude, no matter what you call yourself. I think they've just actually reopened, but it's a series. It's hot pools, and there's a cold pool, and there's a steam sauna, and there's a dry sauna, and then there are 3 far infrared sauna rooms, heated to incredible temperatures. But going between the hot baths and the cold bath, and the cold bath is like, I think it's heated to 62 degrees, and then the hot are between 93 and 102 or so. Going back and forth between them actually does exactly what you're talking about. You kind of, once you're in the warm one, it goes back in, you go back into the cold. And like, oh my God, that's really insane and intense. But it works. It's kind of great.
When I was a much younger person, I used to go skiing with my buddies. We used to go in the hot tub if there was one, and then go roll in the snow, and then go back in the hot tub. This is what we did before girls would talk to us.
I didn't know.
Yep.
I wasn't talking to you.
No, I guess not.
Yeah. I didn't know you then.
Right. That's your excuse.
That's,
and you're sticking to
that's
it.
why I didn't talk to you. I didn't know you existed. Okay, my computer has shut down again. No, it was just playing games with me. Okay. Is the idea of memetics an analogy, or have thoughts and culture truly gone through a Darwinian type of evolution? Are our minds miners of information, sense-making, and pattern forming? If so, aren't we just discovering memes?
So I think the answer is like the more radical of your 2 possibilities raised to the 10th power, which is to say, it ain't an analogy, and it's not a parallel system. What it is that the genetic system is the genetic system has set in motion a mimetic system to solve the problems that the genetic system cannot solve because it's too slow and too molecular. So in essence, the conversation that we are having now is predicated on it's a little hard to know where to start the clock, but let's say at least tens of thousands of years of accumulated wisdom from ancestors that we will never be able to identify, which makes us effectively a different species than those ancestors because of all of the tools that we can bring to bear on sorting out the world, right? That is no accident. That cumulative culture is the ultimate superweapon of evolution, right? This is evolution 10.0. And the fact that the genes create a mind that can do that and that does do it, right? That figures out what to pass on and then allows other things that were useful and are no longer useful to go extinct, thought-wise, etc. That pattern is so potent that the genes are laughing all the way to the bank for having invented this thing. And I don't know why our field is so dim about this, right? It is so obvious that this is the genes having come up with something so genetically fantastic in creating the memescape that once you see it, you can't unsee it. And yet, even people like Dawkins are...
Well, I was going to say, I think, why is the field so dim? In part, it's a cryptic capture by the Golden Lewontin types. And, Dawkins would bristle at that idea that he had actually succumbed to any of their thinking and was not being robust because their, frankly, anti-scientific politicization of evolution had gotten to him. But I think it's patently true.
No, it's clearly true. And, in talking to Dawkins several Octobers ago.
2 Octobers ago,
it became clear, in fact, that part of why he, I think, cannot see the importance of the memescape that he played such a large role in discovering, and in fact was the namer of the memescape,
right.
That the primary thing that holds him back is fear of what it implies. And he's not, when I talked to him about genocide, right, that this was a pattern of history that we evolutionists have to own up to the fact is a product of evolution, right? It's bad. Dawkins full well knows that to say that it is a product of evolution does not in any way constitute a defense of it, and that in fact the beginning of the selfish gene includes a warning. He says, if you must take this as a prescription, read it as a warning, right? So at one time, as a young man, he understood what might be there. But now he is so afraid of being held responsible for the worst things humans have ever done as an evolutionist that he artificially caps the meaning of the memescape.
That's right.
And you can rest assured that if humanity survives and continues to learn more about evolution, that it will have been almost impossible to overrate the importance of the evolutionary adaptation that is the mimetic brain.
Okay. 2 quick questions, because they are either... they're both about books, recommendations or a request for recommendations. Bret, have you read The Meritocracy Trap? A compelling critique of meritocracy discussed recently on The Glenn Show, more explanatory than your rent-seeking hypothesis. Heather, have you read Children of Time? Science fiction with excellent evolutionary world building. Appreciate you both. Thanks for all you do. I have not read Children of Time, and I didn't know of it, but I'll look into it.
I have not read this critique of meritocracy. My sense is I think I know where it will be wrong. I think it will basically, I think it will run afoul of this thing that we talked about a little bit yesterday, which is the difference between seeing equality as a goal versus seeing it as a means to an end. And increasingly, I think this is a key to understanding the schism within liberalism. In other words, I'll just speak for myself. There's nothing great about equality of outcome, right? Now, all smart liberals would agree to that, but the question is why? And I would argue equality of outcome, as I said yesterday, it implies an injustice, right? If people have invested differently, then for them all to be paid equally is an injustice. Right. So that, this is super interesting, actually, because I think that Ibram X. Kendi, for instance, at least, just take for sure, I would say that given what he writes about racism and anti-racism, that he would say that equality of outcome demonstrates
true justice.
Of course
this,
he would.
Like this is, it's actually, this is maybe a completely foundational point of disagreement, that equality of outcome demonstrates one, A or not A. It's really the opposite conclusions.
Right. It is, yes, it's an inverse. And what I would say is, what I don't want is people, I don't want you to take a risk that makes sense to take, have it come up bad, and suffer terribly for it, right? We ought to hedge out people's risk for, taking responsible risks and having luck turn bad on you. We ought to hedge that out. Mm-hmm. And we ought to provide everybody equal tools so that the game is not, we're going to keep you from having the tools to enter the meritocracy in any effective way, and then we're going to blame you for your failure in the meritocracy, which is what we currently do. Right. But were we to give the tools to everybody, right, and then say, look, how well you do is on you, right? Here's what we want you to accomplish. We want you to bring things that make us better off, right? That is to say, things that make us more efficient or more capable, right, or more fulfilled or more delighted or whatever it is, right? Bring us those things, and it will result in you having more power, freedom, etc. Right? You want the person who, discovers how to make fusion work, overcomes all of these obstacles. You want that person to live in a beautiful place, to look out over something wonderful, to, you want them to have freedom because you want that incentive to cause lots of people to try to do it. So how do we even get here? So the point is, if you think that equality is the goal, you want everybody to live the same life, I think you're just a fool, right? Because that world, not only does it have an implied injustice everywhere, because people are not always going to decide to invest the same amount, and for them to realize the same benefits is an injustice, but it also doesn't motivate people to do what we want them to do. Yeah.
So, hey, this question wasn't supposed to prompt conversation, but here we are. You and I are much less likely to imagine that there are vast differences in ability at sort of the zygote level. And, even by the time of birth, there are differences in development and uterine environment sufficiently that differences have begun to spread. But especially for evolutionary biologists, we attribute less of the difference in human capacity and outcome to intrinsic, heritable, by which we mean genetic differences than most people. But there are cultural differences.
Of course.
And some cultures are just a better match. Some cultural practices are just a better match for producing individuals who are more likely to be productive and striving and creative or analytical or whatever than others. And some of the equality of outcome crowd would point to those differences, say you're a racist for noticing any differences at all, first of all, and then say, regardless of whether or not there are differences, everyone deserves the same outcome.
So a hedonistic culture that is interested in just enjoying shit and doesn't worry about productivity or sustainability or any of that should be just as rewarded as people who make human life better for the next 1,000 years.
That's clearly at least an argument of one part of the woke revolutionaries.
Right. So I think the point is, look, how much would these people have to get wrong for us to just simply say, actually, getting shit wrong is their specialty, and giving them power to enact their dreams is not a good idea, so let's not do it.
Yeah, well, let's see how that goes.
Right.
How much would they have to get wrong? Yeah, well, clearly a lot more than most of us thought, right?
Right. Yeah. Apparently. Yeah. I think there's no level of wrong that they could be that will not result in us trying out their stupid dreams and wrecking civilization over it.
Yeah. Okay. Next question. Dear Heather and Bret, can you suggest some good books or references to understand biochemistry from an evolutionary standpoint? Thank you. My answer is unfortunately no.
Yeah, biochemistry.
But I wanted to read that and offer that question up to the chat and see if anyone has any ideas. But I got nothing on this. I have never encountered a good evolutionary approach to biochemistry, and I've rarely had to deal with biochem at all. So
Yeah.
it's not for attempting a deep dive and coming up with nothing. It's only been a shallow dive in both of our cases, but I don't know anything.
My sense is the skills that are involved in understanding biochemical pathways are in tension with the skills of understanding functional biology at other scales of space and time.
It's much more sort of precision lab work, reductionist,
Well,
formulaic.
I don't even want to necessarily say that. That may be the case, but my sense is if I sit down next to somebody and they say I'm a biologist, it's like, oh, cool, let's talk. And if they say I'm a biochemist, it's like,
we might not have anything to talk about.
We don't speak the same language.
Yeah.
It's not like I'm not interested, but it's like the likelihood that I'm going to be able to even understand what it is that drives you is pretty low.
Yeah, which is part of the magic of Luca Turin, right? There are a lot of us who can actually speak across various scientific domains, but the fact is that we are much more at home in one or another, more holistic or more reductionist. But he seems to have facility in biology, chemistry, and physics almost equally.
I agree.
It's incredible.
Well, the interesting thing to me is that the biochemists are harder for me to understand than a biophysicist.
Yeah.
Biophysicist is intuitive enough. The biochemistry, it's a very different skill set.
Well, I think this could go on for a while, but I think that some of what's going on in chemistry, as the science that I grok the least well, is that a lot of what they're doing is still metaphorical, and they say it's not. Like I don't, the whole sort of electron shell and valence. You're about to lose your coffee. Arguments strike me as metaphorical, and the few chemists and biochemists that I've tried to draw into conversation on this will tell you, no, it's literal. We got this.
Yeah, I think that's not right. I think
Which part?
Chemistry, I would argue, is the field. If you take the extent of what we will ultimately know, right? We will asymptote to knowing everything about all fields if we last long enough. Mm-hmm. The extent to which we already know chemistry is much closer to that final asymptote than any other field. Now, biochemistry is the part that we know least because the pathways are so complex. But in terms of basic molecular stuff, no.
I mean, like numbers of protons, neutrons, electrons. Yes, I'm not claiming I think that's metaphorical, but even just like electron shells.
Well, I mean, there's a place at which the theory tops out, but it's so highly predictive that I think it's less metaphorical rather than more metaphorical than almost anything else. But in any case, I do think it is not an answer to the question that was posed to us, but you do point to the right thing. If you want to understand how people like us and people like biochemists, the landscape that might exist between us, the Emperor of Scent, which describes Luca Turin's work, is the way to see into this because...
Yeah. I mean, he's more of a biophysicist, but he's obviously doing a lot with chemistry as well.
Yeah.
The Emperor of Scent, written by Chandler Burr about Luca Turin. Yeah. Next question. Recent studies suggest that human brains release oxytocin when exposed to stories marked by increasing tension, a phenomenon that presumably played a huge role in socialization within hunter-gatherer societies. Are you aware of any other adaptations that arose specifically from our long history of telling stories around the campfire? So I will say before...
I didn't quite get the question. Can you encapsulate it?
Are there adaptations that arose specifically from our long history of telling stories around the campfire? So that's the fun part of the question that I figured you could riff on. I will say that I'd love to know what these recent studies are that suggest that brains release oxytocin when exposed to stories marked by increasing tension, because there's a whole lot of oxytocin work of late, and oxytocin having different effects in female versus male brains under the same circumstances after making the same decisions, and having seemingly counterintuitive effects under one condition than under another, which just points to especially endocrinology. There's a relatively small number of molecules that are being used to mitigate huge numbers of behaviors, and we shouldn't be that surprised when something proves to be not controlling, but involved in a tremendous number of disparate behaviors. And I don't know this one, but I'd be curious.
Yep.
I wonder what Fairfax is like after an espresso. I would not like to see that, actually. We have so far kept him from the espresso.
I have a very different sense. My sense is that he's always after an espresso because he so regularly defeats us in trying to keep him out of the coffee.
Yeah. But put aside the oxytocin stuff for a moment, although I'd be interested to see what that is. Other adaptations that arose specifically from our long history of telling stories around the campfire.
Yeah, I mean, we will probably never know, but you might say that narrative music is highly likely to be a downstream consequence of more primitive forms of storytelling around a campfire, more triggering of memory that facilitates these things being passed on. Also conducive to creative alterations. Therefore, a song is an evolving entity, right? There is microevolution in every song under normal human circumstances, which we don't realize because recorded music repeats the same damn thing again and again and again.
Yep.
The campfire itself starts out as a cooking, warming phenomenon. The opportunity, because it draws people together to share heat, opens up all kinds of cognitive possibilities, and so all of them are an answer to your question, more or less.
Yeah, maybe many aspects of language itself, and just at a maybe less interesting, less behavioral, less cultural level, probably the ability to sleep. And to come to find sleep being easier under redshift light as opposed to blue shift light has probably as much to do with campfire as it does to the fact that that the light from the sun shifts a little bit towards the red at sunset, but not all that much. That mostly the sun basically is providing blue shifted light, and it's campfires that provide red light. So when I read at night. In bed, I use a red headlamp if you're there next to me, so as to not keep you up and to not to keep my brain going, right? And moving around at night with a red light as opposed to a blue or an incandescent is better for sleep.
Yeah, absolutely. Somebody here suggests that s'mores may be a downstream adaptation of the campfire, and my feeling, their screen name checks out. S'mores are evidence of low standards at a culinary level. It's really such an inferior creation, and the fact that we are fascinated by them, I find a bit remarkable.
Yeah. No, but I think this is something that we've been talking about for decades. The role of the early human groups around campfires, when it turns out that we domesticated fire a very long time ago, and it's impossible to know how long ago, but far longer ago than we thought even 20 years ago. And yes, at first it was almost certainly about other things, about heating our meat to extract many more calories from it than we could otherwise extract, and making it easier to digest so we didn't have to spend so many hours a day chewing, literally. And being able to keep ourselves warm and being able to defend ourselves against animals. But the sociocultural effects are in many ways much more fundamental to who we are as humans. And this is something I believe Dick Alexander wrote about this as well in his monograph back in 94. Maybe.
Trying to remember.
Yeah, in the Uniquely Unique Species. Yeah. Okay. Next question. What is love? To start, I'm just going to read 3 sentences from our book.
Okay.
From chapter 8. Love is a state of the emotional mind that causes one to prioritize someone or something external as an extension of self. That's it. Love, the genuine article, is a matter of intimate inclusion. And when it is real, there are few forces more powerful.
That's it.
Yeah?
Yep.
Yeah,
Interesting that we wrote something so true into our book. I don't know why we did that.
I think there's a lot of truth in there.
Yep, I think so as well.
Yeah. There's campfires right in the first and last chapters as well.
Yep.
And the role of campfires. All right. What is the relationship between love and consciousness? You said consciousness emerged from trying to share concepts between individuals, so it seems to be strongly connected to reciprocal altruism. Also, the Buddhists reach full consciousness through a state of universal love. Are the neurological circuits of love and consciousness the same? Are they in a positive feedback loop?
Yeah, I would say it like this. You've got consciousness, which we argue is most fundamentally a collective activity, that individual consciousness is a byproduct of the ability to pool consciousness with other humans, and that the key thing in order that it is possible to usefully pool consciousness with other human beings by talking to them and giving them a sense for what is in your mind, having them spin up a version of it in their mind, and then teaming up on what the meaning is, that thing really requires deep trust, right? Because what you don't want to do is allow somebody who doesn't have your best interest at heart to spin up something in your mind that might, cause you to do self-harm the way, for example, the major media platforms do, right? And advertisers in general and all of these things. Yep. So you don't want to let people into your brain who don't have the respect for you and your well-being that would be a prerequisite to their spinning up only useful stuff in that space. So what that means is that people who love each other, right, some community of people that actually has reason to be long-term invested in each other, is a much more valuable, vibrant, and therefore usefully collaborative conscious structure than people who know each other casually or temporarily or whatever. So yes, there is a relationship, I think.
Good. I am 50 years old, been married for 25, and I have never had the desire or drive to have a baby. No tingles in my ovaries or melting into goo-goo gagas when anyone brings a baby around. I don't hate children, almost became a teacher actually. I just don't want any of my own. At most, there's been a curiosity as to what my husband and I would create. Am I a broken human being? Certainly being born without maternal instinct or the drive to procreate is not an advantage, since I have no one to pass the advantages to. And I'm an only child, so I'm it. The end of a very long line.
All right. I would say, yes, you're broken, but you're broken with respect to a program that is itself not good, right? Our program contains a lot of good. You can take the human program and you can edit down to the part that is noble and decent, and you can live that way. And I would strongly advise that that's what you do. But the basic point is, look, you're broken with respect to a program that is itself amoral, right? It contains lots of awesome stuff. It contains lots of terrible stuff. So recognizing that you got a faulty version of this program in the sense that that program wants nothing so much as to take your genetic spellings and put them into the future, right, is no big loss. The question is, what will you do with your detachment from the evolutionary mission that you've been handed? So, in other words, I would say we all owe it to ourselves to break our relationship with the evolutionary objective, because the evolutionary objective leads to horrible places. It creates much that's good, but it also leads to terrible places, and we got to stop it with the terrible places. So anyway, you're broken, but in the end, we will all have to be broken in some way. The one caution I would give you is that the production of offspring gives you an investment in the future that if you don't produce offspring, you will have a more difficult time finding that investment. You still have it. In fact, your genes are out there in so many different versions from other people right? That you have reason to be invested in the future. But one thing that happens to people who don't produce children is they do go a little bit crazy because basically they can see to the end of their lives and they don't much care beyond that. And so careful.
I have a different answer. I mean, I agree basically with the first part of what you said, but I think we live in such a strange moment where really for the first time, we can be sexual and actually not end up with children. That's just contraception, and the combination of contraception and abortion has never been so perfect in a way before now in evolutionary history. So it's not at all clear to me that mostly people who had reproductive capabilities and were sexually active wouldn't have just ended up with children anyway. And and I say this, I read this and thought that could easily have been us. This is also true for me. I not once. My mother told me this story. Right, woke up at one point when she was close to 30 and said, it's time. I never wanted a kid before, and it's time. And I was born very soon thereafter. But that never happened for us, and either of us. And I'm glad that we had the two accidents that we did. But does that suggest brokenness on my part because I didn't have baby lust ever and still don't? And in fact, when people bring babies around, I think, okay, cool, maybe. But utterly and completely and totally fell in love with our own children, and never could have imagined anything else. And that's something that this person won't know whether or not they would have or not. Like if you have a child and you don't feel an intense, deep, lasting, would do anything for bond, that's a kind of broken that is dangerous and and needs to not be broken. But I don't think that I feel like a lot of this stuff that women are told about what is going to happen to you at the point that you start aging into it being more difficult to reproduce, and you're going to have these tinglies and these like, I'm not sure. I think this may be a lot of advertising garbage, frankly. And and we know women who've had that, but I am also not alone, and she's not alone in having, some of us have ended up with children whom we adore, and some people have ended up not having children. But I don't think it's inherently the natural way.
Nope, I'm pushing back.
Okay.
The fact is, evolution wants to get your genes into the future by any means necessary. So when I say broken, I mean in the same way that a population that discovers that a neighboring population can't defend itself and still refuses to go to war is broken. Mm-hmm. Right? So...
But mostly you don't need, except for now, when you can so carefully plan a family, you have, for a woman, it has been important to choose a good mate and to desire sex with that mate. It has not been necessary to desire a baby in order to end up with a baby.
Oh, no. That's not what I'm saying.
So the having sort of baby lust hasn't been at all necessary in order to end up with, the sort of reproductive Darwinian fitness that we talk about.
Well, all right. But first of all, I would say that you do have this characteristic. It's just not targeted at babies.
I do?
Yeah.
It's targeted at this guy?
Yeah.
And all of his ilk, yes.
Right.
Okay.
So there is a way in which you can't resist the cute cat that walks across the street to come say hi to you.
But they're cuter than babies.
Fine. But my point is that pretty clearly is an evolutionary mechanism. It's displaced onto creatures that you find more compelling.
Right.
I think that's fine. I mean, there's no lack of love for our children in you. You love them, as one would imagine a mother would love children. But the point is, I don't think the baby lust thing is absent or hype. I think it's displaced. And I think a lot of people have it displaced in this way. And, I also don't find babies especially compelling, right? I find our kids very compelling, but they became more compelling as there was more to interact with and they weren't just perfectly helpless.
No, but you and I both found both of our babies completely compelling, and it actually surprised both of us, I think. Like, wow,
was
you could just spend a long time just looking at them.
It was
And
very
they don't do anything.
amusing to talk to them as if they were college students. And then sooner or later, they start talking back as if they're college students.
Yep.
But, okay. Again, there's lots of stuff that your evolutionary program wants you to do that I think you have an obligation not to do. You have an obligation to break your own program, right? The, men who find a woman vulnerable should not act on a woman's vulnerability. Populations that find their neighbors incapable of defending themselves should not destroy them and commit genocide. So there's all kinds of evolutionary programming that we have an obligation to break. And that's what I'm getting at.
Okay.
Is that
so you're broken in a way that is honorable and good on you.
Potentially, the only caveat being, if you don't have biology inflicting on you something that will cause you to see the future as important. The future is important, but we don't naturally get that. What we naturally get is my kids are going to live there, so I want to protect the future. So you've got to write that code in yourself if you don't have kids who are going to write that code in for you.
Yeah. Okay. Women in the upper middle class seem to have babies very late, and much fewer babies than women historically. Is this correct? If this is correct, what is the root cause and what downstream effect does this have on parenting and further downstream on children and society? It is correct.
I would say it has a couple consequences.
Can we see root cause first?
Yeah, root cause is birth control, which allows you to decide when to have children.
I don't know if that. I feel like
and competing opportunities.
I would say greater economic emancipation in combination with economic emancipation into a landscape that didn't have to make accommodations for taking a break for a few years earlier in your career, such that in order to make it, women have to push it later so as to take a step away from an already flourishing career as opposed to one that's nascent and they might never be able to create later.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if that's root exactly, but that certainly is part of why, basically professional women, so upper middle class women and professional women is pretty good overlap in Venn diagram terms. You push it because there's so many other things going on, and this can be portrayed in conservative circles as women ignoring what their maternal instincts, and it can be which is sometimes true, but mostly just a nasty characterization. And it can be portrayed in some liberal circles as women escaping from the confines of hearth and home and exploring all the things that they should have been exploring all along, which is also somewhat naive and potentially dishonoring of what some women would like to be doing. Some upper middle class women who would really like to have careers and family both would prefer to be having kids earlier. That wasn't true for us.
Yeah.
Right. Like we never would have had many of the experiences exploring, traveling, doing tropical field work if we'd had kids when we were 25 or even 30.
Yep.
Yeah.
So what I wanted to get at, though, is how to even say it. The parenting has been broken by several different things. One, the rate of change of our way of life is so fast that whatever the wisdom of parenting is out of date. If you get that wisdom, it's out of date before you apply it, right? So that rate of change makes parenting very difficult in the modern era, or difficult to do well. The fact of later parenting, so let's say parenting, there was some culture of parenting which was time-tested and evolved. Mm-hmm. We broke that by accelerating the rate of change of the lives we live. We broke it further by creating the nuclear family, which is not a normal structure, right? It is a structure that has always existed inside of larger structures that conveyed parenting information. So we used to have a very...
It didn't exist in isolation then, is what you mean.
Right.
It did exist. It just wasn't an isolated entity the way it has become.
Right. We made it autonomous and made it so, I'm going to move to Milwaukee to participate in this industry with my nuclear family, thereby breaking my bonds to the rest of my family and all of this. So
wait, we're not moving to Milwaukee, are we?
No, that was a hypothetical.
Very good.
Okay. But the point is, did two things that really screwed up our culture of parenting. So parenting now sucks at the level of it's 98% sucky because whatever you think you're supposed to do just isn't right and it's not going to work. Okay. Having children late means you're less stupid when you do it. Right? You have more wisdom. So instead of sucking at the level of 98%, it might just suck at the level of 90%. So parenting sucks.
I think we sucked at less than that level.
I think we beat expectations, but the point is...
Well, I don't know that we beat expectations, given that we were... You finish what you're going to say. I'll say...
My point is, we really fucked up parenting, right? We, humanity, fucked it up by speeding the rate of change up and breaking down the structures that would cause people who knew what to do to be in your environment as you were raising your children. And it's resulting in a lot of bad parenting, which is resulting in a lot of bad adults who had childhoods that didn't properly prepare them for life and were living that catastrophe, right? Having children late works in the opposite direction because it means that some of your stupid, naive ideas are gone by the time you actually have children who would suffer for your having them.
Yep.
And so that's a good thing, but it ain't enough. We have to do a lot more to restore parenting to a viable phenomenon.
Yeah. Well, I also, one of the things that you and I talked about before we had kids was feeling pretty certain that we would want to have had children, in part because one of my particular research interests, actually, that I worked on as a graduate student was the evolution of parental care, and not in humans and frogs mostly, but also thinking about other primates. And it seemed like it must have been a strange choice to have been so interested in the evolution of not just mate choice and territoriality and social systems, but also specifically parental care, to then choose not to end up engaging in parental care ourselves.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, and I think you slam dunked all these things, the mate choice, the parental care.
No doubt.
Sorry. Couldn't resist.
Mm-hmm. Is there an evolutionary basis for tri-parenting? Recently, I read an article about it and immediately questioned whether or not it was just another opposing the nuclear family or a potentially good way of raising children. So I'd never heard of this.
My feeling is if you try parenting, you're pretty much stuck seeing it through. So
I looked it up. It turns out it's on a page called the Weinberger Divorce and Family Law Group, which I didn't realize that's where I found it. And I saw the Divorce and Family Law Group tab open in my I was like, what the hell happened? But no, it's on tri-parenting.
Tri-parenting.
Yes. TRI. And this article just has a story about a gay male couple and their female friend who all three of them wanted to have a kid. And one of the dudes donated sperm, and she had the kid the normal way, and the three of them actually parented until she fell in love with someone across the country and wanted to take the kid, and so this went to the court, which is why this is on a family law page.
Well, there's your answer.
And yeah, there's your answer at one level. Isn't it hard enough when two parents find that they don't think that they can any longer live together, and how do they deal with the children? It's going to be more and more difficult when you involve the legal system with more parents. That said, is this a nod to the sort of it takes a village model of parenting, which is what you were implicitly referring to earlier by saying that the nuclear family was never a standalone entity before now? Yeah,
except the problem is there's all of this stuff over in polyamorous culture,
right?
About, lots of mommies and daddies, bullshit. And the thing is not going to work, right? The structure necessary to neutralize all of the game theory that will tear that apart is almost unthinkable.
Yeah.
And so what I would say is Yes, your polyamorous games are all well and good until there are children involved, at which point they have really serious negative consequences unless you're absolutely going to slam dunk the game theory part, which almost nobody's in a position to even do.
Yeah.
So anyway, all of these versions in which you're going to try something new because you can't think of a reason not to are likely to end in at least some fraction of a disaster.
Yeah. I'm reminded, actually, I can tell this story without giving anything away, of hearing from a former student recently in the last year or two after Evergreen blew up, who reported, among other things, how thrilled she was that she had just given birth, and she had pictures of her with her baby, and she reported that the father with whom she is close is currently off vacationing with the other woman in their triad with whom she is polyamorous. And I'm like, oh dear God. Like, you poor young woman. And she's not even, she's not even that young. She's in her mid 30s. But at that point, at the point that she reached out to me and shared this, she was still under the belief that this was a delightful and wonderful situation, as she was home alone caring for a newborn and thought that her partner was doing her a solid by being off with another woman.
Right. And how is that relationship going to endure when they hit hard times?
Right.
I mean, the game theory, if you've got two women in a relationship with a man, then the point is, A, the man has tremendous bargaining power.
Oh my God.
And there's just no way it's stable.
No, there's no way. Okay. Could the denial of biological sex differences have the perverse downstream effect of putting young women at risk, as they may come to overestimate their ability to defend themselves against predatory men and engage in riskier behavior in situations? Yes.
Yeah, I didn't catch the very beginning of that.
The denial of biological sex differences have the perverse downstream effects. And, I 20, gosh, now closer to 30 years ago now, I saw this, and I didn't interview the women that I saw engaging this way, but I was very briefly, I think I mentioned on a private live stream before, I was very briefly at Smith College, one of the Seven Sisters, one of the women's colleges. And it's in a cluster with 4 other colleges, one of which is another women's college, and 3 of which are co-ed. And I'd come home, I was only there for a few weeks, so I didn't have very many of these experiences, but I come home from my one friend who I'm still friends with. I come home from visiting Lisa, who was off campus, and see, these women tottering along on their crazy big heels, alone at night, clearly drunk. And I'm like, that's not safe behavior. And, I don't know if they were just fed lies about you are safe no matter what, because it would be a sign of the patriarchy if anything happened to you, and therefore you don't have to take responsibility for it. So that's like one angle into that kind of stupid behavior. But another angle in is if men can do it, you can do it, because you're just as strong and identical in every way as men. But of course, men aren't tottering around on high heels either.
No.
Right. So, I mean, it's such deep confusion at so many levels that confounds, confusion on top of confusion that confounds itself. But yeah, I do think the denial of biological sex differences is going to put young women at risk, along with, I don't know, everyone.
Yes. And find men. I mean, this is lame advice at one level, because I can't say anything about what's out there and how hard they are to find. But if you can, find men who don't want women hobbled, right?
Yeah.
Those are liable to be better men.
Yeah. Chinese foot binding, not so much,
Yeah. Anything of this nature.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Do you think that part of the mass psychosis sweeping through our societies could be due to declining openness and respect between men and women, and an extreme pendulum swing in the direction of favoring female strengths of empathy and communitarianism over male strengths of stoicism and independence? What do you think the best solution is to foster a society that balances all of those qualities rather than warring over them? Again, yes, absolutely. And it's been decades now that I've been seeing and hearing, and been at conferences even, where people say, we need more if women were leading, all these problems would go away. Down with testosterone, up with estrogen. And actually, the most recent time this happened was at this invited plenary that I gave at the Krishnamurti conference of all places. This would have been 2 years ago, something like that, 2.5 years ago maybe. And it was a fascinating group of people, and I was talking about sex differences in part. And there were like 3 woke people in the audience, and I wouldn't have called them woke at the time, but there were 3 woke people, including someone who worked with the Krishnamurti organization and was just clearly outraged by what I was doing. And it was a hetero cis white guy, and he kept muttering during the Q&A, which went on for a long time, about how we needed to basically reduce testosterone to 0. And I just started pushing back against him. Like, you really think that would solve the problems of the world? You really think if you just take all men out of leadership, that everything would be unicorns and rainbows?
You just went fully masculine on that guy.
Well, he needed it.
He did need it.
He really needed it.
That's what I would have done. Yeah, no, of course. The problem is we've got novel circumstances which require us to do something new, which means that we can't just take the prior solutions that worked and apply them. We have to figure out how to refactor them. Mm-hmm. But the idea, everybody smart knows that masculinity is important, right? Can masculinity be democratized more than it is so that women who have masculine strengths are in a better position to wield them? Sure, and
same for femininity.
Right. But the idea that masculinity empathy,
communitarianism, stoicism, and independence, 4 really valuable traits, right?
The first time I heard the patriarchy invoked as the enemy was during Occupy, and it was in the same sentence as this person was advocating the installation of a matriarchy. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, what problem are you trying to solve? Right. And, how can you not see that you're going to cause something like the inverse problem? So anyway, yes, the answer is figuring out what the new version of these old and very important things is, right? Bring the part that makes sense into the present and refactor the part that's anachronistic cautiously, right?
Yeah. And I'm reminded, I'm not going to remember which tribe it was. In Sebastian Junger's tribe? No, it was War. In his book War, both of which are excellent books, highly recommended. Sebastian Junger's Tribe and War. And War was recommended to us first by our friend Dave Stevens, who made the knife in the background and also the Dark Horse logo, and various other things.
Yes,
you're looking
around. Those other things?
Yeah, he made me a machete. Mm-hmm. Younger in the book reports on, I think it's the Navajo, and I will come back next month and if I'm wrong and repeal this. But one of the sort of Central Plains-ish tribes in North America who effectively had 2 different systems of governance. And the council that mostly governed during peacetime had, if memory serves, a mixture of male and female, but it might have even sometimes been slanted towards female, maybe somewhat female dominant. And they ran, whatever it was to run civil society most of the time. But in times of war, the war council was the deciding council, and it was entirely men. And I don't remember, there were some rules around, if they saw a threat that the Peace Council didn't, they were able to say, actually, we're shutting you down now, and we're going to go do this thing. And certainly there would be excesses on both sides. But similarly, after a certain amount of time, the Peace Council would come in and say, like, okay, guys, you're out. Like, it's now our turn to get back to actually making things run. And, that kind of dynamic makes sense outside of the gender dynamics, right? There are going to be people who are better at right now, we have, this is an emergency. We got to deal with this. We got to get through this, and not very good at the stable day-to-day, how do we get things done? Where do we store the corn sort of decisions? So in general, that is more likely to be a male-female than, maybe it's also like an old-young dynamic. It's a little bit, little male-female, young-old to keep it in line. But the idea that there should be one leader or one set of leaders for both war and peacetime is actually kind of ridiculous.
No, and you'll find adaptations of this sort all over the place. I mean, famously, there are wartime consiglieres in mob situations. I saw a very good discussion. There's a ceremony, a Jewish ceremony called an Ufruf, that before my brother and Pia got married, this Ufruf ceremony involves, it actually involves the hurling of hard candy at the couple about to be wed. I kid you not, the idea is marriage is sweet, but it stings. And so anyway, that. But
so you end up bruised at your own wedding ceremony?
It's before the wedding ceremony,
right.
So you have time to get over it. But,
no. Oh, I would say maybe you haven't bruised yet.
Right. So the Ufruf was followed by a discussion, and the topic was, why didn't God let Moses into the promised land? And the answer that the congregation came to was, I thought was brilliant, actually. Somebody who favors trade-offs as a lens, was that Moses was the desert wandering guy. That was his specialty, and he would not have been a good leader. He would certainly have been leader if he had been allowed in. And so anyway, there's a recognition.
Best to keep the people from ending up choosing the wrong guy.
Right. And yeah,
interesting.
Totally. Yeah. And in fact, there's a weird connection to the founding of the American Republic, because George Washington was the right guy, but George Washington, because of his strength of character and because of, he wasn't the most visionary of the founders by far, but because he understood the vision, he refused to become king or the effective king, even though was the natural thing. It's what people expected to happen next, because
they loved him. They were thrilled with him at the time. Yeah.
Would have been a natural. And so the reason that he was the right guy was that he actually didn't want that job, right? He knew better. And so anyway, there's bound to be an indefinitely large number of these kinds of stories that reflect the same dynamic.
Yeah. The fall, another sex-ish question. The fall in political discourse tracks well the entrance of women into politics and academia. The worse the major, the more dominated by women it usually is, gender studies being the worst. What percentage would you give the fall of political discourse being the result of more women in the public and academic arena?
Okay, I got the setup. The setup being, there's something about women-dominated disciplines that tends to be off kilter.
No, that's just an aside.
Okay.
It appears that culture has fallen off the rails in temporal coincidence with women having more power in academia and politics. And to what degree do we find that correlation causal?
To an unfortunate degree, but I would say that there's a reason for it. So women have this obligation to take care of each other, to bolster each other.
So let's just go back to the previous question for a moment. With the values that were described, female strengths of empathy and communitarianism, male strengths of stoicism and independence. Right?
So there is something you do not want. Imagine a battlefield, like a literal battlefield, right? You do not want somebody to propose a solution. You're pinned down under enemy fire. You do not want somebody to propose a solution to the problem.
Let's see what everyone thinks.
And have other people say, oh yeah, that's a really good idea. Yeah, good one, right? You want
or
people,
put it to a vote.
Right. You want people to shoot it down if it's a bad idea, or to point out what's wrong with it and not worry too much about the feelings of the person who proposed it, right?
Oh boy, no, I actually think, I thought you were going someplace totally else. I think you actually need chain of command stuff. Like, no,
You
actually there's
do.
a hierarchy, there's a leader, and, we recently watched Band of Brothers with our boys, and, watching the soldiers recognize a terrible leader who would certainly get some of them killed were they forced to follow him into battle, and do what they could by any means possible to make sure that he would not lead them there, because once there, they would follow his order.
Yeah. So I guess I messed up the analogy by saying under enemy fire.
Yeah.
Because that makes it modern. I think the military command structure is largely a solution to a modern problem, which is creating a military force out of people who aren't related to each other, didn't grow up together, don't have those dynamics instilled.
They suddenly have shared fate, but they have no shared history.
Right. And so I still say, dynamics that have traveled the male route, wisdom that has traveled the male route, is a much better fit for life and death decision making under hostile conditions, where you don't want sensitivity and an obligation to make people feel like they've contributed, a good idea, where that doesn't apply, where people just aren't paying that much attention to each other's feelings. So
yes,
the point is, there is an aspect of what we are seeing in the breakdown of academic rigor, in the breakdown of disciplined thinking about governance, all of these things.
But it's a move of the pendulum, right? That like the traditionally female way of doing things, the traditionally male way of doing things, and all of the best of us have some of both of these.
Yeah.
But the traditionally female way of doing things has not just gained some acceptance and prevalence in the academy, it's just slid so far over to the female end that you don't get decisions just being made that are better but hard.
Yes.
Right. God, fucking George Bridges, the president of Evergreen, was a perfect example of, a failure, just a failure mode that reflects this is what happens when feminine ways of doing things are weaponized by a mob.
Yep. So I think we should think of the hazard of this transition as the yes and apocalypse, right? Under very dire circumstances, you don't want the requirement to say yes and, you want somebody to say no, and here's why. Yeah. Right?
Sit down.
That's a bad idea. No.
Yeah. So I mean, I assume you did this, but I used to almost always, within the first week of a class where there were already a lot of people asking questions and such, I would find an opportunity to say, hey, that's a really good question, but guess what, guys? Not all of them are, and you all know this. You've all heard people say they're all good questions. There are no bad questions. We all know this is a lie. Each of you will have bad questions in your head. Some of you will ask them. You're not going to get penalized for it, but you will be expected to recognize when you've asked a bad question, and I will tell you so, and I will do so gently, but for God's sake, some questions that some of you have are going to be bad questions, and some ideas that some of you have are going to be bad ideas.
There are no bad questions. There are wrong assertions, and that is one.
Oh, good. Wow.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. And you didn't even teach philosophy.
No.
All right. Oh, here comes the dog. The dog
God.
is about to tell us that it is time. It's not time, though. We got another 20, 25 minutes or so. Hi, friend. Okay. Hi, Heather and Bret. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the antinatalist movement saying people shouldn't have children to curb overpopulation, presumably for environmental benefit. Is there any reason for people living in developed countries to not have large families?
Well, here's the thing. There is a way, everybody needs to think more about tragedies of the commons. I gave a talk years ago called The Personal Responsibility Vortex. And it was basically my taking of the logic of tragedy of the commons and pointing out what it has to do with self-restraint to save the planet, and how that is a self-defeating process. In this case, it's perfectly obvious. All right, let's say we decide it's a good idea not to have kids in order to reduce the pressure on the planet. There's no question that a modern human being takes a huge toll on the planet, inevitably. And it's very hard for a modern human being to do anything to compensate the planet for that huge toll of resources that will never be recovered.
And modern isn't just about the when, it's also about the where. A weird human being, someone born into a Western educated, industrialized, rich, democratic nation takes up a lot more resources than someone born in Papua New Guinea.
So I always, in my mind, keep the mental exercise of imagine that you're on a football field surrounded by all of the resources that are unrecoverable that you will use during your lifetime. All of the gasoline that you will burn to transport yourself, all of the trash that can't be recycled, all that stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Just imagine what a lifetime's worth of stuff for an individual American looks like. It's a huge amount of stuff.
Yeah.
Huge amount of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, and then what is that American likely to do? That American can't help but make the world worse by that much.
Mm-hmm.
What is the opportunity for that same person to make the world better by that much or more?
Right.
It's pretty remote. Anyway, put that aside. Let's say we say, you know what? There are too many people. Yes, there are too many people. I agree with that. People are very costly to the planet. Each individual takes a significant toll. Yeah, I agree with that too. So don't have children so that you can reduce that toll. Great idea, except who's going to listen, right? The people who are liable to instill in their children that this is an actual problem, right? And the people who aren't going to listen
and who might create children who are therefore more likely to work towards solutions that can actually help us live with the numbers we have in a more sustainable way.
Right. You will, if everybody who understood the problem of population didn't have children, that leaves a world full of people who do not understand the problem of population and will make it worse. So the point is, the paradox, the tragedy of the commons in the form of the personal responsibility vortex is that if we say, here's what you should do to save the planet, and then the people who agree do it, then the world moves in the opposite direction because the people who don't agree that that's the thing to do suddenly are empowered because they're spending less on the solution. So personal responsibility is a marvelous thing in a context where it makes sense. It is a terrible thing at the level of solution making with respect to sustainability. So have children and make sure they understand the problem.
Mm-hmm. And fewer cruise ships, fewer flights in general is suggested up here.
Fewer cruise ships, fewer flights. Mm-hmm. Well, I never need to see another cruise ship.
Right.
I've never been on one, but I could see fewer cruise ships. I do think part of what we are suffering now, the yes and apocalypse, is in part a downstream consequence of the fact that a lot of people who needed to see at least one other place haven't been there and therefore have no idea what they're talking about with respect to diagnosing the problems of the West.
Now, this is exactly right. So in general, I think, I want to agree with the idea of fewer cruise ships for sure and fewer flights ish. But I'm reminded of an anthropologist at Evergreen who was not very bright, honestly. But she started going after study abroad programs like mine and then ours. Because it involved taking 15 or 30 students on a plane to another place, and just think of all the carbon.
Yep.
Think of all the carbon. And my point was always to her, I am actually taking people who have never been outside of the state of Washington and helping them get to places that reveal to them a world that is far larger than they ever imagined. And they come back more enriched, more capable, more actually aware of what is true of the world, and more actually compassionate and empathic, rather than having swallowed some knee-jerk pap from you who don't actually know what the world looks like. So no,
when you say you're not talking about me. You're
no,
talking
I was
about
talking
this
about
anthropologist. Yes,
Karen character. Not an epithet. I hate that epithet. It's her actual name. What? No.
I'm going to pretend I'm not here.
Okay. Wow, I don't even know what just happened. What was that? Okay, I really don't know. I hate this epithet.
Yes,
that I would not.
I
would
hate
not,
it as much as you
I
do.
would not be using that.
I agree.
So yeah, fewer flights, ish. And there's a lot of flying that happens when it doesn't need to necessarily. For business, for instance, I suspect when people don't actually get to see the place they're going, and it's some of that could have actually taken place via Zoom, for instance, but actually being present, really present in a different place, does open your eyes to what is true in the world in a way that clearly a lot of people currently protesting on the streets have never managed to experience, for instance.
Yeah. That said, it would be great if there were less polluting mechanisms to get to these places.
Absolutely.
Take the train to Brisbane. That's my feeling.
No, it's not.
No. I was trying it out. I'm over it.
Can you find Brisbane on a map?
I think so.
Okay. Bret mentioned that he doesn't see the need for a new religion during a previous live stream. That is, you mentioned during a previous live stream that you don't see the need for a new religion. After I burned down my city instead of simply pondering the insult over a glass of warm milk, I came to agree. However, do not we need something that is religion adjacent?
Yes, absolutely. You need something that does the job of a religion without so look, you got a built-in vulnerability to these things, okay? Yeah. I'm not a God of the gaps guy, but I think there's a degree of truth in the argument, right? It's not the argument, but it's a piece of it, right? Yeah. Which is to say that the metaphorical truth engine tends to find all that which can't be explained and come up with narrative explanations that fit the gap. And then what happens? Then you get all sciencey and you discover the gap is actually filled with something else. Now you've got a problem, which is the people who are adhering to the moral precepts of this way of thinking are now faced with having to ignore the scientific discovery because the book says that something else fits in that gap.
Right.
If we set that up, we are setting ourselves up for failure. So what that means is you need something that addresses these issues, but doesn't come undone by virtue of what you will inevitably discover that runs afoul of the narratives that you just used as mortar to build the thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, mortar is the right analogy there because of gaps.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I don't remember the actual quote from Genesis that I read from Hoffer yesterday, but
it involved slime.
Yeah, the slime, using the slime of
the copious
impoverished humanity, or the copious slime of hagfish.
Yes,
for the gaps.
Right.
Yeah. Now this is where Genesis meets evolutionary biologists.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. I don't think that was coherent to anyone but us.
No, it's fun though.
Yeah. I mean that is one of the lessons for a lasting relationship. Having fun in ways that maybe no one else would possibly understand.
Quite gets.
Even when you're on air.
Yeah.
Art is more effective at changing opinions than is dialectic. Hypothesis. This is because art is essentially a first-person experience. It bypasses the normal filters and negotiation that takes place between people. It becomes your lived experience. Note, if you've studied creative writing, there's an aphorism, show, don't tell. This means put your reader in the place and give them details so they can imagine themselves in the scene. It's a kind of, it's a borrowing of theory of mind, effectively. I, the person asking the question, could also talk about how music tempo is related to the heart rate, but I think you get the point. How does this work? If you've studied Piaget's accommodation versus assimilation, which I have, but it's been a long time, I don't remember, you are less likely to assimilate, discount, or modify first-person information that conflicts with existing schema. Gimme eat.
Yeah, I mean, we present a model for this. We presented it a little bit. We did in a Princeton talk last year. It's in our book. There's more to come, but the model involves us figuring out what's true, us, that is to say humans, figuring out what's true, very often at a campfire. How do you do it? You take a bunch of different brains that know different stuff, and you get them to spin up the same problem simultaneously and discuss the different things that each individual can see and to correct for the blind spots that each one has. And you come to some collective emergent realization about what's true that no individual and even the sum total of all of the individuals working apart couldn't have come up with, right? That's the new insight. But you know what? It's clumsy. It's uncompiled code, right? So you've got this thing, and now we know what's true, and it's important, but it's not elegant, right? What happens? Now you take it and it gets made more elegant over time. How? By selection. That is to say, ways that you would describe this to somebody new that are more accurate and effective at conveying the important part, that is the prescriptive part. Those ones outcompete those that are still clumsy or result in a slightly wrong interpretation on the part of the listener. So over time, this thing gets edited down to something awesome and transmissible that isn't itself literal. That's how you get to metaphorical truth, right? So in some sense, art is an inherent part of this process where you take the true inelegant description, right, and it gets made elegant and transmissible and awesome in some way that it becomes part of the shared culture, that as soon as you're old enough to understand it, somebody shows it to you or says it to you, and suddenly it's yours and you know what to do with it, right? So that process doesn't necessarily predict that it will be art, but it predicts that there will be some highly elegant, highly transmissible form that results in the correct behavior downstream being the thing that gets passed on, right?
So this is a great, beautiful encapsulation, of course. I think there's also something to be untangled here around we all know people who are the other thing in the following description. You see a piece of theater or go to live music or go to a museum and see 2D and 3D art, and you're there and you go with a person, or you go and your partner or your friend or whatever has also gone within the last week. And as soon as you're done, they want to talk about it. And you have the sense of, I don't want to send this linguistic yet. I can't, I don't have that in linguistic space yet. And I could, but it's going to actually interfere with my ability to assimilate. Seems like the wrong word because it's got these negative connotations, but it's going to interfere with my ability to sort of move it into this conscious, this potentially conscious space, in order that I have a sense of what I think it means. And then once we've both had the time to do that, then let's spend the time. Then let's absolutely build something even better, emergent in the sharing. And I think people tend to fall into one of those other of those camps, although the I'm not ready to talk about it yet is also the easy escape for people who just aren't able to do the analysis and aren't willing and aren't going to.
Yeah.
So the it's not in the linguistic frame yet. Highly introverted people such as myself can be mistaken for I don't know what I just saw and I'm not interested in figuring it out, so leave me alone.
Yeah. So I would say this is also, there are some different kinds of, I don't even want to say career because I think it's a lame category, but different kinds of mental orientation to the world have different strengths and weaknesses. And the scientific worldview comes with some defects of character that are the exact inverse of the strengths that are engendered by these characteristics. So a normal human being, that is to say, a non-scientifically oriented human being, all humans have sort of scientific capacity in them, but if it's an obsession for you, if it's how you see everything, you have these characteristics. And one of them is the desire to resist social pollution of thought, right? Yeah. Social pressure to think along with what other people think is so great, and we are watching civilization come apart over it. So you know how dangerous this is, right? Mm-hmm. The idea that there's some pressure to agree with the consensus means that when the consensus is wrong, and it would be highly profitable to figure out in what way it is wrong, the chances anybody will do it are low because they're so heavily pressured into the consensus. So how do you avoid that? Yep. Well, you have to find a way to unplug or be wildly insensitive socially to what other people think, right? You either have to find a way to compartmentalize and say, well, I know people think that, but what if they weren't right? What would that look like? And does that match my experience without the two touching, right? Mm-hmm. Or you have to not care, right? Which can turn you brusque or all sorts of things that people don't like. Right. So anyway, we have a culture in our family. My home family had this culture too, mostly Eric, but a culture of figuring out how to reach a conclusion independently based on something you've seen, know what it is, and preserve it before you discuss it.
I didn't know in your natal home that emerged from Eric. I would have said it was from your grandfather.
It was really me and Eric, and I'm sure we picked it up. I don't think Harry formalized it, but I think we picked it up by the fact that he was very good at not giving a shit that other people thought something different. When Harry had spotted something that he was right about, right? I mean, he was very charming about it, which is how he got away with it. Right. But he was not persuaded socially at all. And so I think Eric and I picked that up from him, and then we formalized this thing like, okay, do you know what you think about this thing? Before we ever give any indication, whatever.
In some ways, it may be a defense against having a lawyer for a dad. I'm serious. Yeah. Like, I mean, what I've seen of sort of the legal mind, and specifically of your father's legal mind, there's a specific way that litigators get in and try to change what it is that you think is true, such that the story starts to conform more to their model. Yeah. And not because your father's a bad person. It's just like this, just literally the job description at some level.
Yeah, the job description of a lawyer is to be a bad person. And I will say, I think the only fully successful defense against having a lawyer for a father is having a lawyer for a mother, and then you rent a judge and a jury, and then, at least you got a fair fight. But you're looking at me.
Well, I just think, a lawyer for a father, a clinical psychologist for a mother, you were doomed.
Well, yeah, clearly. And you by extension. All right.
But I chose my doom.
Yes. Yes, you did. I've been meaning to ask you about that, but I'm afraid you might wake up. All right. So where were we? We were talking about the preservation of what you think against pollution, and that this results in a very idiosyncratic way of immunizing your own view. The natural thing, as you've seen a movie, let's say, is to be tuned in even to the sort of grunts and body language of the people you've seen the movie with to figure out what they thought. And to the extent that you hated it and you think they're loving it, you'll be persuaded that maybe there's something better there than you realized. And the trick is to not do that. Right. Which results in a social jeopardy, right? When somebody wants to find out what you think about something and they are giving you no indication whatsoever about what they think, there's always the jeopardy that you'll say, oh, I thought it was really good. And they'll say, well, it was actually crap, and here's why, right? And then you feel bad.
Yeah. No, and this tendency to conform, which, as we've talked about elsewhere, is actually more pronounced in women than in men, but is absolutely a true social thing for all humans under some circumstances, is part of why when I taught animal behavior, when I taught actually how to do empirical animal behavior from observation of pattern all the way through presentation of your analyzed results, I would tell students, under no circumstances do you go out and start trying to actually take data with someone else. Like, you can go and try to discern pattern, whatever, but in terms of now you're going to go out and try to watch the ducks or the spiders or the monkeys or the parrots, depending on where you are, you go out alone, because even if you're like, oh, well, we're both working on, this troop of spider monkeys and we'll be working on different individuals, just having someone there next to you whom you are conscious of socially and who may be affecting what you do and when you write and how careful you are with your stopwatch to indicate when you take your data is going to affect your data.
Yeah. No, can't help it.
Did you see something good?
I see somebody has said Bret's haircut is a work of art, and I have a number of things to say on this topic. One, I doubt at this moment that my haircut is in evidence at all. I know that I desperately need my next haircut.
Do you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I do. I also know that this person has not used an apostrophe in Bret's, which is either lazy or an indicator of some kind of grammatical failure on this person's part. And worse than that, this person has violated one of the central rules of the Dark Horse podcast.
Oh, no.
Which is, if you're going to critique my hair, you have to give a useful suggestion about what I'm to do with it. Because I never get useful suggestions. I get criticism.
That's not inherently a critique.
You don't think so?
I don't know.
I kind of think it is.
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
I honestly don't understand
why.
I mean, maybe I just haven't seen the actual critiques, but as I and many others have said to you, to the fact that you are patently never going to go bald suggests that to the degree that you get hate about your hair, it's jealousy.
I think there's a fair amount of that. But yes, the thing is, we don't know if I'm going to go bald, because although I firmly believe that these transhumanists that are trying to make us indefinitely long-lived will fail, if I'm incorrect about that, I think that I'm going bald very, very slowly, but it would take 300 or 400 years in order to see evidence of it.
You're not going to live that long.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah. Okay. It is 1:08. It's been 2 hours. Let me see if I can get us through just a couple more. I won't get through all the ones I had picked, but
all right. So no stumpers then.
Oh, maybe.
Okay.
So this is not. You haven't had a chance to look at this. I barely have. But this person has tried reaching out to us a number of ways. So I'll say it out loud here, and then maybe we'll be held to account next month if we fail to do anything. How best to unite the silent, reasonable, but sheepish majority against the loudmouthed, incoherent, woke, authoritarian minority? I have over, this is all in caps now, I have over $1 million in nonprofit assets in Game B, green energy, prototyping ideas to donate to the Unity cause to help do just that. Further explained via the PDF, download accessed here. Please consider my nonprofit offer. Thanks for your efforts. Nils, he has his name in the question. I'm a fellow authoritarian victim, hence my serious motivation to eradicate this scourge.
So let me understand something. This person doesn't matter with respect to the question. This person is actually offering funds if there's something useful to be done?
He has a property north of Toronto, I believe, and a number of skills, and he wants to turn the property into something that would be specifically about working towards these goals.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I do think I know
think
the
that
answer.
does make it Canada, which we can't even get to at the moment. No, we could fly to Canada.
Yes.
Yes. We can fly. Americans
Or
cannot go overland.
Come around
Catapult.
Oh. Yep.
Boat to Alaska. No, but still even...
The thing is, I don't think they're checking that northern border. You know what I'm saying?
The northern border.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't think it's heavily checked. But anyway,
it's terrific.
Now that we've contemplated criminal activity, let us address the actual question. The actual question is, what the hell do you do about these woke authoritarians? And something occurs to me that I think is useful.
Well, so he's basically saying, I have some answers. Please look at what I'm attaching here.
All right.
Respond to me.
Good.
People,
so I want to add something to the list of answers. Maybe it's already on the list of answers. I don't know, having not looked at it yet. Mm-hmm. But here's the thing. I think there's a feature, an unspotted, as far as I know, feature of the online environment in which people are increasingly living their lives that is disrupting the necessary thing to resist this, which is absolutely intense personal relationships, right? Mm-hmm. The thing that is necessary to resist the woke apocalypse is somebody that you can absolutely rely on, not to be persuaded or to bully you or whatever, right? So
or to tell you you're making sense when you're not.
Right, exactly. In other words, you need somebody.
So, but that's a sort of both things, like that they won't bully you themselves, and that they will also not, if you start to get captured in some way, be nice to you, because it might hurt your feelings if they say, you know what, I think that's wrong.
Right. Like you and me, for example, mm-hmm. right? We have an investment in each other that even extends beyond our own death, because we have children and they have the potential for grandchildren, and et cetera. Mm-hmm. And so the point is, our incentive to, tiptoe around each other's feelings on stuff that really matters is pretty close to zero. Mm-hmm. And we both know it, so we don't take it personally. But
mostly. No, you're better at it than I am.
What's
not
that
taking personally.
Yeah. But the point is, I actually feel like saying to any young person, you are misunderstanding what a partner is and why you desperately need to find one, and therefore should probably consider accepting some defects that fairy tale narratives have told you don't need to accept. Right. But you need a team member that is so thoroughly on your team that you can actually trust them, because you would have had multiple of these in a past environment, and the modern environment is very likely to give you none. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yes.
So you need that thing. And so in answer to this offer of solutions, mm-hmm. I would add
yes. Mm-hmm.
whatever it is that creates partnerships that are so robust that they are capable of being impolite and direct as needed, that thing is the key to resisting. And the reason that so few people are resisting is that very few people have this. Even with their spouses, they often don't have it.
Yeah.
So
Very much so. We know many of these stories, and I don't know. Gosh, I just don't. I mean, especially right now, it's not even how you go home at night, but like how you just live in the same house when you're not sure what kind of brain lives in the body of the person you're going to bed next to.
it's the problem of the junkification of everything, which is that people have low quality substitutes for all the stuff they used to have high quality versions of, and they don't even know what they're missing.
Yeah. So we are going to get to two more of these, but Al Quinn says, pretend you are driving to Alaska with regard to getting to Canada.
Got it. Pretend. Oh, that's the way to do it. Pretend. But the problem is they will hunt you down.
No, that's not the problem. We actually know why this won't work. It's again our friend.
It's the Canadian
Dave
Mounties.
Stevens. Good Lord.
Do you have something awkward to tell me? No, I get it. All right. So we actually know someone who, by virtue of his work situation, divides his time annually between Alaska and Florida.
Yep.
And so he had to cross Canada in the recent...
in like May or June or something.
And there were intense regulations that involved demonstrating that they had food, for example, to be able to cross overland without stopping for food.
So it was him in an RV with his daughter.
Yeah.
I mean, he could have flown to Alaska, but they, for whatever reason, they felt that they needed to, his adult daughter, or his nearly grown daughter, they needed to go, and they had stuff that they had to get up to Alaska.
Yep.
And they weren't allowed to enter Canada.
Right.
Unless they could demonstrate that they had enough food to get the way through. They were legally not allowed to talk to anyone. Yes,
they had to promise to only stop for fuel, to not interact with people in so doing.
Engage in no commerce except for fuel.
Yeah.
Like it was pretty crazy.
I mean, I get it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. But anyway, it's apparently not enough to just say you're driving to Alaska. It doesn't work. I mean, we were wondering how it was that once he was in, they would.
The Canadian Mounties. That's what I was getting at.
Yeah.
They will
gallop
hunt you down
up
and
and shake a fist at you,
I guess.
Okay. Silicon-based computation seems to be doing a great job of projecting itself as far as possible into the future. Humans currently look remarkably like the ants, and silicon computation the fungi in this. It's got a Wikipedia to Ophiocordyceps. So this cordyceps fungus, of which there are many, like hundreds, I don't know, many species of this cordyceps fungus that invades not just ants, lots of species of insects in the Amazon, and causes them to behave strangely in such a way to spread the fungus.
To die in a place that lets
it makes
spores.
them climb. It causes them to, like cicadas, engage.
I think I got a very good picture of, it was, what was it? Was it a beetle or it was a
There were cicada. They where we were, we mostly saw the cordyceps
Anyway, I'll see if I can dig up that photo.
But anyway, so this guy, so cordyceps is the fungus, and they invade some insect host, and then before killing the insect host, cause the insect to behave in such a way like climbing to a very high spot in the canopy before dying, at which point all the fungal spores are released.
Or climbing, in the case of some ants, climbing to the top of a blade of grass where they will be consumed by a secondary host. Is that right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's crazy. But anyway, silicon-based computation seems to be doing a great job of projecting itself as far as possible into the future. Humans currently look remarkably like the ants, silicon computation the fungi. Interesting, I hadn't thought of that. In a hat tip to Thomas Nagel and our poor understanding of consciousness, what is it like to be silicon computing?
How would we know?
How would we know? I also like that question because I figured I could get you to make a face when I said Thomas Nagel.
Well, right. Okay. Yeah. No, sure. You wanted me to roll my eyes.
Yeah. And I think you did.
Yeah. Oh, good. Yeah. There's this.
So the paper, what is it like to be a bat? He's a philosopher of.
I wouldn't go that far. Yes, this
anyway,
is a paper
and this
I quite dislike.
This paper drives you completely
drives
nuts.
Me completely crazy
because you're both a bat biologist and someone who has thought deeply about consciousness, and you sort of feel like the guy just gets it wrong.
Well, it's like postmodernism. There's a point, right? What is it like to be a bat? You're never going to know completely. Can you know a lot? Yes, you can.
Yes. That's in part what animal behavior is for.
Yep.
Yeah. What is it like to be a Bret? That's a harder question in some
I'm not
ways.
even sure I've got a beat on that one.
Yeah. Okay. 2 more.
All right.
I know. Just 2 more. Thoroughly appreciate both of your work. Looking back to some of the great thinkers of Western Civ has inspired me to consider humor and satire with respect to the modern schools of postmodernism and critical theory. If these theories are repressive, I don't think we've utilized this powerful tool of ridicule yet. It's also significant that very few of their adherents are funny at all. Humor can tip the scale. So there's not a question there yet, but this is,
Here's the problem. I totally agree. Ridicule is a very powerful tool, but the problem is its use has been poisoned by the invocation of this exact principle by Saul Alinsky.
Oh,
so
really?
Saul Alinsky, a great villain, points to the power of ridicule and basically has, in some sense, led to its wild abuse. So I agree. We need to resurrect the proper use of ridicule. And in fact, what a wonderful way to bring Douglas Murray into the discussion, because he wields ridicule like a surgeon. He does. I mean, right?
You make me a little nervous about surgery. I mean, I was already plenty nervous about surgery.
Yeah. All right. Good.
Okay.
So that's what I would say is, yes, ridicule is important, but beware the Saul Alinsky connection, because if you invoke the need for ridicule carelessly, you will be challenged as a descendant of Saul Alinsky.
Yeah. Okay. Great villain, Saul Alinsky. Interesting. Okay. Why, the final question, why is humanity so beautiful?
You only think humanity is beautiful because you have been programmed. In fact, if you look in the mirror and you squint just exactly the right degree, you will discover that we are in fact apes and are very funny looking. And yes, there's nothing beautiful about humans. What we are capable of, if you edit out the part that's so horrifying and you take only the part that's so inspiring, that indeed we could be beautiful, and we should do that. But it's going to take some careful work to separate those two things from each other.
Good.
All right. On that hopeful note, that wasn't bad.
Oh.
Moderately hopeful.
Yeah, that was moderately hopeful.
Yes.
Yep. And the dog is officially telling us it is time to go
to
outside
something
and
else.
throw a frisbee around or something.
Oh, you want to come up here? All right. I think that's it. This was great. Great questions. And we will attempt to uncancel Louis C.K. if we can. Mm-hmm. All right. Is there more to say?
No.
All right.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
We really appreciate it.
This is up to me. I have to end the stream because I am Annette.
You are Annette.
I am Annette. Yes. So I'm going to, let's see. Oh, yeah. Right. Okay. Bye, guys. It was great.